Hello, imperfect leaders. It's summer! And for leaders, that means reflection. And it means planning for the coming year. It is for that reason that this week's episode is an encore episode specifically picked with your upcoming year in mind. And then as Labor Day approaches, Season 3 will kick off. And I'm so excited about that because Jamie Almazan from the Equity Collaborative is going to be joining me as a co-host and commentator. It is going to be great. So sit back and enjoy this encore presentation of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, "What questions do you have for us?" And they will always ask, "Well, what kind of support can I expect?" And we will always say, "Well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor." But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. Superintendents are often asked, what do you do exactly? My favorite was a parent who once asked me if I had the summers off. So, it occurred to me that people actually don't know what we do. So the superintendency is like a three-legged stool. One leg, we're kind of like a priest or a rabbi or an imam. We bless the good work we see each day in buildings and classrooms, and we stand in awe of teachers. We announce to the community, almost like a town crier, the things that have happened, the things that are happening, and the things we expect will happen. Now, the second leg, we are CEOs. We are tasked with overseeing a highly regulated, complex system. Our revenues are mostly public monies, local, state, and federal tax dollars, and we take a solemn vow to be excellent stewards with people's money. It's why I never expensed a meal while in town. It wasn't illegal to do it if I was having a business lunch, but I just couldn't turn to my next door neighbor and say, "Thanks for buying me lunch today." And then I guess the third leg, and today's interview actually with Matt Robbins made me think of the three-legged stool metaphor. We are chief storytellers. Now, some might say, "You're politicians." Yeah, but it is our responsibility to tell our district's story and to persuade legislators and courts of law when we believe changes need to be made to benefit children. So in today's episode, Matt will talk a little bit about a court case he's involved in Kentucky, involving vouchers and charters and public school funding. It's a really good one. Enjoy. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Matt Robbins is my guest. Since 2017, Matt has been the superintendent of the Daviess County Public Schools, a district with nearly 12,000 students and 2,000 staff members in Daviess County, Kentucky. And what's different about Matt is that he didn't follow a traditional route to the superintendency. His background is in finance, but that has only fueled his motivation to energize his district with a commitment to putting kids first. Matt, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
It's great to be with you today, Peter.
So, Matt, for several years, you have served as the team leader for finance and operations training program for Kentucky's Association of School Administrators Next Gen. It's a new Kentucky superintendent program. And you're also president of Kentucky's Council for Better Education, a group that ensures equity and adequacy of funding for Kentucky's public schools. And so I wonder, would you tell us just a little bit about your role in leading Kentucky's Council for Better Education? I know funding for public education looks different from state to state, but actually there's a lot of common ground that we have in terms of commonalities of trying to work with our own local communities, state entities, and to be in this position of advocacy for public funding. So I wonder, would you talk a little bit about your role?
Peter, one of the things I've tried to do is to use my background as a former finance person that worked in the private sector to use that and leverage that to the advantage of our profession. Specifically, you mentioned a couple of things that I'm involved with. Our state new superintendent program, I lead the finance training for that, as well as I'm involved with the Superintendents Association Board of Directors, and I'm also president of the Council for Better Education. And like many school districts across the country, we're experiencing the school choice reform movement from the legislative action. And the Council for Better Education is a separate company, has a lot of great history, as a matter of fact, to it, some of which I was not a part of. But going back to 1990, the Council for Better Education brought a lawsuit that dealt with adequacy and equity in the funding formula that really is still the substance of the formula used to fund schools in Kentucky today. The council is all focused on adequacy of funding. That's our primary objective, because we feel like the funding formula is equitable as it exists, but it's the adequacy that's become a real major issue. And now what we're seeing is legislative action. There's a House Bill 563 that we're actually in litigation right now against the legislature towards funding private school tax credits, which is really a voucher scheme is what it amounts to. And we won in the district court on that one. We just made arguments in October in the Kentucky Supreme Court, and we're waiting to hear the final decision of the Kentucky Supreme Court on that decision. Then this most recent legislative session last winter, the legislature passed a funding mechanism for charter schools, which we see as only another drain on funding for the common public schools in Kentucky. So we're considering what we may do as far as action about that one as well.
When I think about the work that you're doing and the leadership that you have taken on, there's sometimes a question of, why is this important? And you've talked about adequacy and equitable funding. So you believe equitable funding, but it isn't adequate. And so I wonder if you would unpack that just a little bit. What is it that schools are missing by this shortfall?
Well, it's probably more relevant now than it's ever been before, because coming out of the pandemic era nationwide, we've seen that our students have immense needs. And it's very, very important for our schools across the United States, not only just in Kentucky, but that we have appropriate resources to meet the needs of our students. But we do think the academic scores that are just now coming in over the most recent round of NAEP, as well as state assessment scores, reflect the immense needs of our children. And that's not going to be a short-term thing. It's going to be a long-term need.
I think you're raising a really good point. For those who are listening and don't know what NAEP is, it's the national assessment that is given nationwide. It serves as a report card for the nation about how children are doing. I think typically it is administered to fourth graders. And one of the things that you said that comes to mind is, so I was coming from a state that borders Kentucky. I would say that in Missouri, we recognize that since 2004, there's a foundation formula that has been updated. And I would not argue that it's been equitable in terms of funding, because there are a number of districts that are continuing to get the same funding that they had gotten in 2004. I think you raise a really important point, and that is, coming out of the pandemic, that education in a post-pandemic era has really highlighted and spotlighted the very different needs that communities have. And so if you have high poverty, if you have high mobility, if you have a range of languages spoken because you now, your community has welcomed refugees from all over the world, and that comes at a cost in terms of being able to educate. And so I think that the work that you're doing is so important, and I'm grateful that you're in the fight. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter.
In the leadership model that I've been using to advise others, there's a dimension called leaders learning work, which is really the brains of an organization. And it comes from a human-centered school transformation model. And inside that dimension is a term, applying systems and design thinking. And for superintendents, designing and applying systems does not come naturally. We go from leading schools to leading large, complex systems. And we've had to learn how to think about the decisions we make, the unintended consequences of those decisions, what those decisions might look like 3 to 5 years into the future. And we learn, sometimes on the job, how to apply systems thinking tools. But someone like you, who has come to the superintendency in this different way, from a different path, who's been an accountant, who's had to, lead district finances, system design is, I think, in your blood. And so would you tell us a little bit about the role that systems thinking plays in your role as a superintendent?
As you mentioned, systems thinking process is just something that is ingrained in terms of my upbringing, if you will, as well as my professional experience, you hate to get to the point where everything you look at is a perfect system or process. When it comes to human beings, it doesn't work quite that way. It's one of the things I've quickly learned from this, but it is still very applicable. And, we're trying to deploy multi-tiered systems of support for our students, MTSS, within each and every one of our schools. And it looks at it from a framework that makes sense to me, is that, for 80% of our students, we expect for them to receive proficiency status or better within the classroom on a day-to-day basis. But we know that doesn't work for every kid. When we know our students need additional tier 2, tier 3 supports in the classroom. And so the whole PLC model, a professional learning communities model, is something that I love and enjoy. I gravitate towards that because I do think in this age of trying to improve student achievement in schools, of highly effective PLCs are they're really required. I don't think you can be successful in achieving great student learning without highly effective PLC models. So we've really put a big focus on this, particularly coming out of the pandemic. Of both of those are systems-oriented models of learning that enable schools down to the individual classroom to meet the individual needs of students and how they do that. So I came across something this morning. I like things that make things simple, that tend to be very complicated, but it asks 4 basic questions that comes out of the PLC model. What is it we expect students to know? How do we know if they do not know what we're expecting them to have learned? And how will we respond when they don't learn? And I just think if a PLC can ask those 3 basic questions as they're progressing through the curriculum, I think those are basic questions that allow us to respond to the unique needs of students.
People like Marzano are right now applauding if they're listening to this podcast. I would say that you're absolutely right. If you can stay focused on those 4 questions, then the PLC process, the professional learning community process, works. What happens is when we start admiring problems and talking about everything that we can't control is when we really struggle as a system. And so staying focused and being anchored to those 4 questions absolutely drive us in the right direction. Thank you for talking about systems thinking from that approach. Now, Matt, one of the questions I ask every guest when they come on the podcast is, what does the term an imperfect leader mean to you? So how does that resonate with you?
Well, I think it's perfect in terms of the way I view my own leadership. The imperfect leader means that the opposite of that would be that you're a perfect leader. I don't think there's any such person on the planet. I've been around, and fortunately, unfortunately, I've been in this work for almost 30 years, and I've seen a lot of different leadership types come, and I've seen them go. And I've seen some people that no matter which room they walk into, they've got to be the most brilliant person in the room, and they've got to let everyone know that. And I've never found that to be successful, particularly with any longevity attached to it. And I just think of the imperfect leader as someone that's human. And I think sometimes as leaders, we're a little bit afraid to be a real person and connect. But I think that's really the way you connect with people, is to be a real human being with all our faults and failures. But to me, it also reeks of being someone with a growth mindset that, I'm going to make mistakes. Things are not always going to be perfect, but at the same time, we're going to learn from our mistakes. We're going to grow from our mistakes so that we become a better version tomorrow of who we were today.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest again is Matt Robbins, Superintendent of the Daviess County Public Schools in Daviess County, Kentucky. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we just discuss it a bit. So Matt, what happened?
Oh, this is well too fresh in my mind, Peter. We had to delay the start of our school year in August by 3 school days. And as you can imagine, anyone who's in a leadership position and starting school, be it a principal, certainly a superintendent, you know all the things that go into that. And there's sort of this momentum, if you will, to start a school year. And we had done all those things internally, but we had to delay the start of school because we had some issues in our transportation department. Long story short, we were implementing a new software that in the end, the story does end much better than where it started, but it was a really bad way to have to start a school year. A lot of people were disappointed, upset, but it was the right decision. I'm convinced of that. And I still do it today because I did not have confidence, particularly with many of our kindergarten, first year students, young students, that they would be safely delivered home in the afternoon to their residents. And I just couldn't go with that. That was a bigger problem for me than having to delay the start, knowing what was going to come along with that.
So that's a really juicy topic, as my mentor would say. She always refers to things as a juicy topic. You know, you think about 5-year-olds waiting at a bus stop without a bus showing up, or children getting on buses and being taken to different spots, and what that impression might be for a family in terms of sending their most valuable possession, their child, to school, and knowing you want to make sure as a superintendent they're going to get there and home safely. That had to have been the hardest text to send out to families, email, tweet, every bit of it, because it is not the way you want to kick off. We're excited for the new year in 3 days. So you got to wait 3 days. Sorry about that. That had to have been really hard. As you look back, no doubt, you're looking back on this decision to pause and everything leading up to it, not just the action of pausing, but what got overlooked?
We were trying to do the right thing, and that was to implement a software that would allow us to be much more efficient. And by saying that means really doing the same job with less people. If you look across the country, matter of fact, I was in Utah this summer, and you see a school with a school bus sitting in front of it now hiring drivers. Please apply. You know, it's again, a nationwide problem. And that told me quite a bit, not only seeing it there, but other places that I've been. So we were trying to figure out, how do we do this job with fewer people and become more efficient at it? The issue we had is just a few days before the start of school, we had a glitch, if you will, with the software that affected other customers. But because we were brand new, we didn't have all of our data saved, we had to start back all the way from the beginning and do rerouting. So it's like the mountain was just enormous for us to climb. And again, it just came back to, what are your guiding principles as a leader? And when it comes to the safety and welfare of students, there's nothing that tops that. And knowing that was just a risk or something I was just unwilling to consider. So we're going to get this right. You know, we're going to no doubt take it on the chin, and people are going to be upset with us. But at the same time, we're going to come out of the gate. We're going to do this well. And like since then, we've deleted, I think the last count was about 12 bus routes, bus drivers that we didn't have. So nobody lost a job or anything of that nature. There were 12 people we literally did not have, as well as, you know, the bus fleet that it would have otherwise taken, you know, to accommodate that. So it did end well. It was the right progression. I discovered, I guess, as a leader then, that maybe I did not, reflecting back on that, maybe I was not as closely connected to the work that was going on as I should have been, understanding of the ramifications. You know, they came on the backside of it.
Yeah. For those who are listening and may not recognize or understand, or if you're an aspiring soup, you may not have this experience yet. One bus typically, it's not out of the ordinary to say that one bus costs about $60,000 a year to run. So not only were you becoming more efficient in terms of being able to deliver the routes, that's money saved potentially that could be then moved towards classroom and for your district's needs. So, I mean, you're talking more than $500,000 of savings there, which is not probably the motivation that you had, but it's certainly a nice ripple effect of a decision that had to be made based on the fact that you just didn't have drivers.
That's right. I mean, it was the perfect time for us to be making the move that we're making. I've always said this, that we were running a 2022 bus operation on a 1960s model, and we really had to get with the times. And there's so much more now that we can accomplish that's going to be beneficial, not only internally, but for parents. We're just kind of touching the tip of the iceberg with that. But it was the perfect time for us to do this because we really had to. And who knows what the future of bus transportation looks like, 5+ years from now. But we know that we had to become much more efficient at how we were doing that because it was affecting our ability to not only have school, but it was also affecting our ability to get students to school on time because we were doubling routes, double back, and all those different things. And kids were missing instructional time that was, detrimental to their own education. So it wasn't acceptable how we were doing things. We knew we had to find a new and better way. And I'm sure going back to systems thinking, we'll have to continually be modifying what we're doing there to meet the needs of our schools and our individual students.
Yeah, mid-course corrections are a hallmark of systems thinking, is to take stock in, are we getting the results we thought we were going to get? And then if not, what adjustment might we want to, lever might we want to pull to see if we can get better results? So what did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed through this process?
Well, I'll tell you, our theme for the year couldn't have been more appropriate, which was Team DCPS. We had already done our staff kickoff and all those things. So, we had the motor running all in the right direction. However, we utilized just about every one of our district administrators did a crash course on learning how to use this software. And we worked pretty much around the clock. But it was pretty interesting to see instructional leaders jumping in to completely immerse themselves in routing and transportation and pickup times and drop off locations. And so it was good from that standpoint. Bad that we had to be in a position that we were in, but it was really good to see across the organization people stepping up in a time of need to help us solve the problem.
So it sounds like it was affirming that as you looked around the room and everybody is rowing in the right direction, that you look around and say, I've got a great team. This is what I learned about relationships. This is the team I'm so proud to walk every day with.
Well, I always call it the bunker thing, but when you're in a foxhole of life, you want to have people who've got all directions covered with you when you're in the foxhole. And really what we learned is that we have several people that are willing to do that and do that well at high level. So again, I would not choose the circumstances by which we had to test that, but it worked. And I know that we have some great people. I knew that before, but it's just affirming to see it happen.
Yeah, it's in those moments that it's nice to be reminded about the high quality people that you have with you. So it seems like a silly question because I could imagine what frustrated you.
Oh, what frustrated me? Probably communication. That again, I thought we were in one place. The learning curve of finding out we were not in that particular place was frustrating. But I think as any organization we're the 10th largest school district in Kentucky. We're about, 12,000 students, 2,000 employees. And so, but I don't think if we were even a tenth of that size, it would change matters from the standpoint of communication is so very important. Vertically, horizontally, diagonally, any which way you can describe that.
So you say communication was the frustrating piece. I wonder if you'd expand on that just a little bit more. Is it that individuals felt as if they weren't communicated with, or just the task of communicating to every level with your board, to your teachers, to your parents, to the community at large, to your bus driver. I mean, what part of it was frustrating?
It was really the communication leading up to it is what I was referring to.
Gotcha. Yeah. If you had known well in advance that there were going to be challenges, you could have made some other contingency plans.
Yes. And when you're superintendent, you're leading all different facets of an organization. And, it's just sometimes it's impossible to avoid one of the pots boiling over. Like it's destined to happen. And that's sort of what happened in this particular scenario.
Yeah, no, that's really true. I mean, you think about your hourly employees who now are asking, so wait, we're not starting. So then do I come in? Do I get paid? Do I not get paid? And how does that all work in terms of nutrition services, custodial, facilities, those types of positions? And then if I am coming in now, is that something that, as from a finance perspective, I've got to think about 3 additional days of pay? Where am I putting them in? Because I told people to come in and they should get paid for the hours that they're working. So those who are listening, who are just sort of interested to know the complexity of a school district, I mean, these are the things that superintendents have to try to figure out. And they do it with their team, no doubt. But in the end, it's the decisions and recommendations that they make to their boards. The next question is, just looking at it from your own perspective, what could you have done differently?
There's no question, if I did more touch points, with the individuals involved in that project, how's it going? Where are successes? Where are shortcomings? Those kinds of leading questions. Are we making everyone comfortable enough? Great news is easy to share, but when you have bad news or news that maybe it's not so well received, are we still communicating about those things? Because those generally are the most important. And you want to make sure that everyone feels a comfort level of saying good news or bad news, I can handle it. But it makes me kind of think from my perspective, what I could have done differently, should have done differently to have prevented that from happening. And most importantly, now that it has happened, I always say this, yesterday's gone. So it's important for us to plan for today and tomorrow. And what is it from that episode that we can carry forward to the next one to be as preventative as possible?
That is exactly what I was going to ask you. In the end, what was something that was good that came out of it? And it sounds like as you experience this and look back on it and reflect on what went well and what didn't go so well, how do you use this experience to help guide you in future decisions?
Yeah, well, I would hope that we did learn a tough lesson, but, we're getting ready to embark on redo our website. That's going to involve school personnel. We're also looking to find some better way of communicating with our parents, K through 12. So we're getting ready to embark on that as part of our strategic plan. And so having this experience in my not too distant memory will certainly be something that will be guiding our path.
It sounds like you may have a soft launch in maybe July as opposed to right in August as school is starting.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. It's better inform me about how we need to proceed on the next thing.
And you should know, I'm not looking at this through a window, but back at a mirror, because similarly, we were launching a new firewall system during the pandemic as we were making sure that every child had technology, had some type of hardware, whether it was an iPad or a computer, so that they could access school. And it was the weekend of Labor Day we were starting, and the equipment wasn't working. Something happened from the firewall side from our third-party contractor in Oregon that they changed something and then went away for the weekend and left a low-level tech to sort of handle questions that were coming in. And of course, nothing was working for us. And so similarly to you, everybody rallied. We had incredible media specialists who had figured out sort of a workaround for the short term so that kids could actually access the first day of school, which was starting online. I'm really looking at it going, yeah, probably a good idea would be, let's not launch these things the days before school starts.
When you think about all the people, if it's change that involves more and more, thresholds of people, it just that magnifies the situation so much more. So
what advice would you have for an aspiring superintendent?
Well, first and foremost, it's important for any individual that has a goal of being, whether it be the principalship or their superintendencies, try to learn as much as you can about as many of the topical leadership areas that you can possibly learn. The reason for that is you can't learn everything, okay? That's just humanly impossible. But at the same time, the more you are equipped with background knowledge, experience is great, but at least knowledge going into it will help that person probably make fewer mistakes and also be a little more confident in themselves and their abilities to lead. Along with that is, I think a person needs to really love to learn to grow, okay? If you don't have that, I want to learn something new every day, both now and then as a leader, I just don't think you're going to, you'll make it. And the other piece about that is don't fear mistakes. Yeah, I think that in our industry seems to be a prevailing thought, is that we're afraid to make mistakes, and that will not release you to grow. It'll also keep you to be very conservative, and then we're not doing the most and the best that we can for students is when we're always afraid of making a mistake. So I'd say those three pieces are the things that come to mind.
The vast majority of us, we follow this path of going from teacher to principal to central office. And right now, the field of education needs great school leaders. And you've shown how there's another path to get to the superintendency, a position that requires a deep understanding of finance, facilities, operations. And the entire time that we've talked together, it is so clear how human-centered you are. And I know you're a Billy Joel fan, so I would say you may be right, I might be crazy, to do this job, but it is so important that we have people like you. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for allowing me to contribute to your podcast.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.